Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine and today I'm joined by Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hello, Joe Devine.
Hello, Seb. Seb and I are delighted today that Alex is unavailable, so we don't have to talk to him. But someone else is here in his stead, and that's the real reason we're delighted. And that person is the wonderful, the marvellous, the athletics, Nick Miller.
Hello.
Hey, Nick Miller, how are you?
Very good. Heavy shoes heavy shoes, big shoes to fill, but you know.
Big and heavy, because as
Big
we all
and
know,
heavy shoes.
one of Alex's legs is shorter than the other, so one of the shoes is actually very heavy, has a thick platform at the bottom just to stabilise his height. But no, you're right, big shoes to fill, because he's a big part of this podcast, and I don't know if you've listened much before, Nick, but I've got a quick checklist here of things that we're looking for you to replace that Alex won't be providing for us today. Are you ready?
Yep, go for it. Yep.
Don't make any jokes, because Alex isn't funny. So that's the first thing. We want you to be dry and to kind of miss the point of what we're saying most of the time, because that's where the humour lies, right?
Okay, just bear with me a second. I just need to delete a lot of notes here. Okay,
Okay, right. Quickly deleting those notes. The other thing is I want a very accurate tactical analysis, and if it's not about tactics, I don't want you to talk.
I'm deleting even more notes. Just kind of staying at
Okay,
the black page
great.
now.
And the final one is I need you to exhibit the kind of smugness that you only get from having a famous parent, okay? And just basically a sense that you belong here and that it's actually kind of annoying that we're here.
Yeah, I can do that. My father isn't particularly famous, but I can certainly fake that.
Okay, great. Well, that's good. I think you're going to do a good job. We've already recorded it. Nick did a really good job. Anyway, on today's episode, we talk about the Manchester derby. We talk about West Brom and Newcastle. We talk about Bayern Munich, Borussia Dortmund, a little bit of Tottenham. We do Joe's Quotes and Facts database, and that's all. So thanks so much for downloading today's episode, and I hope you enjoy. I will now leave you in the warm hands and the very, very cool embrace of Nick Miller. Okay, let's begin then with Manchester City 0 to Manchester United. Who saw that coming? Yeah, that's a thing no one else will have said this weekend. Let's start by talking about Anthony Martial, though, because clearly he's definitely a form player, right? He was inspirational in this particular game, but as I'm sure supporters of Manchester United will have seen, he tends not to show up in some. It's a little bit confusing. And I wanted to ask you about this, Seb, because Cavani was obviously unavailable due to injury again. Martial started at the 9. He actually held the ball up extremely well, which isn't something that he's normally associated with doing. He seemed super confident. He had the better of Stones and Diaz, who've been this, centre-back partnership that people have been talking about for, well, at least since the turn of the year. It felt like his best performance of the season at a time when it was really needed from his team.
It felt like his best performance in absolutely ages.
Yeah.
I wonder, Joe, whether part of the problem with Anthony Martial is as a body language issue. Like, I wonder whether, like, let's not pretend that he hasn't been really disappointing so far this season. That's very fair. But I wonder whether that's accentuated by the fact that he seems quite laissez-faire. He seems sort of, he doesn't have many emotional responses to what's happening around him in the game. He doesn't show visible disappointment when he's playing badly. He's not obviously frustrated. I wonder whether kind of from time to time we're a little bit guilty of buying into that. I don't know. Discuss, question
maybe.
mark.
Well, I don't know. So I feel like what's happened is I've asked you a question, then you've asked me one back. I'll do the gentlemanly thing and answer yours, which is to say, I don't watch that way. I know what you mean. He looks dour most of the time. I find it kind of funny. I found it really funny when he was substituted off towards the end of the game against City because there was the smallest hint of a wry little smile on his face because he must have known he played well, right? But I don't know. I mean, he comes to the ball a lot, and I think we've talked about him on this podcast before as a player who often receives the ball standing still, or at least coming towards it rather than always necessarily running in behind, which is a little confusing, I guess, because he has that kind of pace and that trickery. Perhaps he's been told to do that, and Rashford and Greenwood or Dan James are the players that are more likely to run in behind. But in this game, I was particularly impressed with his strength. I haven't seen him play like that as a centre forward before. I've seen the quick interchanges. I've seen that he has the skill and the vision and the ability to make those, quick, sharp passes between himself and Fernandes or Rashford. But what he did, he shrugged off players today. He pushed Rodri away at one point in the game. He consistently held Diaz and Jones and Stones off of him. I just feel like that is. I wonder if it's just something he's learned from watching Cavani.
We have brought this up a couple of times about Cavani, and I feel as if one of the main knocks against Anthony Martial, at least whenever the why isn't he playing as a number 9 conversation appears, as it periodically does every 6 months, the rebuttal to that is always, yeah, but can he play with his back to goal? And the answer is always no. It's just because, first of all, he's bracketed as a wide forward, so you assume dynamism, carrying the ball at pace, playing on the counter-attack, all of these things which he is suited to doing. But it's like, ordinarily, when a player learns to do something, you would kind of see fragments of it over time. So maybe like last week, he did a little bit of the things that he did well against City. The week before, he had a couple of good moments. And then 3 weeks down the line, a month down the line, then he puts it all together to put a performance. But it was really unusual. And I don't think it was that shocking, because United have this in their bag, don't they? They've have this kind of... I relate the Man City, Man United relationship at the moment to kind of how I feel about West Ham as a Tottenham fan. They're always there to kick you in the balls, no matter what else is happening in your season. They're always there ready to put an axe through it. But what was surprising is just the nature of it, and the tone of that Martial performance it's kind of one I didn't really expect to see him, and it wasn't really because of his poor form. It's just habitually what he is as a player versus what he was able to do on Sunday. Two really different things.
Nick Miller, if you were Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, would you be almost frustrated by the performance after calming down, because you don't get that every week, or at least you don't seem to?
Yeah, I mean, it's he's not going to play like that every week. No player's going to, but just a bit more of that. He's a little bit like in a sort of encapsulation of United, or Solskjaer's United as a whole, in that it's the whole Michael Corleone. I thought I was out, and then they pulled me back in. They drop points against stupid teams, and then they pull a result like this out of the bag, and you think, no, okay, no, this is a proper United team. It's the sort of United team we can all get behind. It's a similar thing with Martial. He will look entirely anonymous for weeks, and then he'll obviously didn't score in this game, but he'll put in a performance like that where you think, okay, this is why people are persisting with him. This is why he's been at United for 7 years, and he's kind of it's always felt like he's never been the kind of the guy, but he's just sort of hung around as the second guy, and has produced just enough good performances in that time to kind of justify that. It's just about managing to sustain his career at one of the top clubs.
It's interesting, isn't it? I wonder if this will help us expand the conversation into City's perspective too, because one of the things I noticed from the beginning of the game is that Martial had space and time, right, which is something that Manchester United won't get against most teams, and so perhaps we can attribute that to, or attribute part of his good performance towards that. He has the opportunity to play well because Manchester City are not a team that's set up reactively. And the other thing that we can see from this within the first 10, 20 minutes is the number of times that Bruno Fernandes was able to receive and then pass the ball, I think was more than in any of the last sort of 10, 15 games he's played for Manchester United, because I think the first thing that happens when a team who are lower than United in the league are facing them is they find a player to put on Fernandes and they don't take him off. And they squeeze that central area and they squeeze all the space out of it, and they don't allow Manchester United to play what might be their natural game. This just didn't happen at all in this game. And the one thing from City's perspective that I want to ask Seb is, we'll start by saying this: they'd only conceded first 3 times this season prior to this game. They didn't win any of those games, and against United it felt like City just didn't have a plan B, or if they did, they weren't able to adjust quickly towards it. They didn't seem to know what to do with United's unexpected high line. They just continued to do what they normally would have done anyway, and trying to play in the very compact space during that game. Is this just a case of them taking a while to adjust because they so rarely need a plan B, they so rarely go behind, or is it that I suppose maybe Guardiola is so confident, and fairly so, in his own methodology that he doesn't feel that there's really any need to adjust, just that they continue playing their own game and it will come good enough for them to win a league season.
Could be a bit of both, Joe. I remember thinking when the penalty was given, like if you concede a penalty after with 35, 36 seconds in a game, you wonder what that does to a team, because you think, right, so whatever match preparation we've done, the one thing we probably haven't conceded for is going a goal behind in less than a minute. You may plan for going a goal behind, but probably not under those circumstances. And so if you're City, it felt as if they never really recovered from that moment, in the sense that they never kind of recalibrated their game plan. And so with 89.5 minutes left, you can kind of fall into the trap of thinking, yeah, we probably can just play a normal game from this point. I think that sort of mindset seemed to manifest in a few ways. As the game wore on, I think it was interesting to see some of the things that we thought were in City's past come back and reappear, some of the kind of the blemishes in their performances. So if you look at the Luke Shaw goal, for instance, and how far he carries it before the 1-2, like that's one of those things that you probably would have found in City last season, with those huge issues in midfield between, the midfield and the defence, and the big chasms that actually we've got a video coming out to describe in a couple of days' time. But it felt like it was a little bit descriptive of some kind of mental fragility. Is that fair, or is that an overreaction?
I don't know, Nick, what do you think?
And it's a point that's been made obviously quite a lot, but they just, because they so sort of rigidly have to stick to Guardiola's plan, that they just kind of don't know what to do when things go against that plan. And there is the mental fragility was something that I think was talked about a lot last season, and maybe towards the start of this season as well, particularly after the Leicester defeat. They lost 5-2 early in the season, and Tottenham as well. That Tottenham game was in November. I know time. I know time has lost kind of all meaning, but that was the Tottenham game when it looked, for all intents and purposes, they're done, and Tottenham were top of the league, and they're going to everyone was mentally and emotionally preparing themselves for the prospect of Jose Mourinho winning the Premier League again, which now seems like it's this kind of distant other era. And also that that Manchester United were finished. Manchester City were finished. It feels like another time. Anyway, so in that respect, it seems odd to sort of question City's mentality given the run they've been on. But those sort of things were being talked about a relatively short period of time ago. So I don't think it is a massive stretch to say that it could be a mentality problem.
Also, is there a difference between league and cup? Because this is like one of the things I was thinking about last night is Guardiola and City's mentality. Let's say whether or not it is a problem within the league, it hasn't been such a problem that it stopped them winning championships, right? Obviously, Liverpool won the league last season, but City have dominated for the last 5 to 7 years, I suppose. But they haven't had the success in the Champions League that supporters will have wanted, and that Pep Guardiola, I'm sure, so craves. And I wonder if that is because of this apparent inability to adapt within games. We know that across the course of 38 games, the way that City plays, particularly against teams that have no recourse against it, is going to allow them to dominate, and probably going to allow them to accrue enough points to win. But when it's important within one specific game, in tournament-style football, do you think that might be like... I know... It's people looking for inadequacies in Guardiola's coaching ability is so tempting because he's so good. But do you think that could be one?
Possibly. It's also it reminds me. Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of. With apologies for bringing other sports into this. It reminds me of baseball teams who follow or in the kind of earlier days of very sort of strict analysis, sort of statistical analysis, in that their plan would work because the baseball season is this insane length, like 162 games. It statistically averages out over the piece, but then when they actually have to get to the playoffs and have these big games, like which would be the equivalent of the Champions League games, these one-off kind of isolated events, that just doesn't work. Guardiola just kind of plans out the how a team will win the league in like some kind of hive mind compacted into his little bald head, but then it just doesn't quite work out in the individual individual games.
Seb, why didn't Phil Foden start? Because, one of the big talking points of this game, as it always is, or has been more recently, has been Sterling versus Wan-Bissaka, which is quite funny to watch because Wan-Bissaka just seems to consistently come out on top despite, Sterling being an incredible player. Foden came on in the second half. He caused Wan-Bissaka a lot of problems. And obviously there's some freshness and energy involved in that. But Foden's also had a fantastic season. So I'm confused as to why he wouldn't start this game. Do you feel a sense of why?
No, not really. I mean, I feel like there might be some kind of clever conditioning justification behind it. But then he hasn't played an enormous amount of games recently. So there wouldn't be no real reason to kind of leave him out of a game of this magnitude. One of the things about City, and this is one of the reasons actually why I found it surprising not that he didn't start, is that if you look at particularly their front 5 or 6, you know how those players are going to hurt you. There are a lot of very, very good footballers in that group, but not a lot of players who can hurt you in surprising ways. And Foden is a variation on that. He's someone that will do different things with the ball. He's quite creative. He's got a slightly more ad-libbing style than, for instance, someone like Raheem Sterling. Riyad Mahrez, brilliant player though he is, his tendencies are pretty established in that kind of Arjen Robben type way. Even Kevin De Bruyne, De Bruyne's a marvellous player. He's fabulous to watch, yes, but he does a lot of the same things game to game, and a lot of them, his moments of excellence, are things we've seen before, just taken to a different level. And I feel like Foden works at City because he's a contrast to that.
He's a wild card.
He is a little bit of a wild card. He's a wild card with a kind of a Guardiola veneer. So he's a wild card who is adapting into that system and becoming kind of homogenized over time, but still with those little flourishes attached. And you saw those against Liverpool at Anfield, and I don't know. It's interesting. I feel like Guardiola's teams need that.
Individualism, freedom of expression, bring down the collective, screw the central PowerPoint,
shut down the podcast, stop recording immediately.
Also that, yeah.
It's not the sort of rebellious talk that we like here, and certainly not the sort of rebellious talk that Pep Guardiola likes. I actually wonder whether this was the kind of the obvious thing that people always say about Guardiola is that he overthinks big games. I wonder whether this was the first example of him underthinking a big game, because it was quite a sort of, I don't know, like straightforward team. It was, back four. There were obviously, Cancelo comes in field and Zinchenko to a lesser extent as well. So it's not a sort of straight 4-4-3, but it was 4-3-3. But there was a holding midfielder, a couple of number 8s, and then 2 wide players, and it just seemed like a very straightforward, very logical team. That he was almost treating the game against Manchester United like he was playing Fulham, which by coincidence this was exactly the same attacking 6 that he played against Fulham earlier on in the season. There was I think Mendy played at left back rather than Zinchenko, but otherwise it was exactly the same starting 11. And you wonder whether he just. It's not like he didn't think about the game, because we know what Guardiola's like. He plans these things meticulously for most of the time. But he kind of knew that everyone knew how United were going to play. They were going to play the counter-attack, try and sort of sit as deep as possible. The early goal was, you can't, as you were saying earlier, you can't really legislate against that. You can't really plan for that. But maybe rather than Sterling and Mahrez out wide, you would need players who, as Seb was saying, to kind of just do something a little bit more unpredictable, to do something to kind of unpick a defence that was going to sit deep, which is where Foden and
I think I agree with you. I agree with you about like the thinking sort of underthinking the game. I really like that way of looking at it. But Manchester United play a high line. This is the thing. Like, I don't think anybody knew that they were going to do that. I don't think Guardiola knew. I think the expectation was that they would sit deep, and that certainly happened more as the game went on, partly just due to, I think, the pacing of the game itself. But for that first 30 minutes, United's back line was really high. It's the high. I think Gary Neville said it was the highest he'd ever seen them play, and so I think that's one of the things that confused Guardiola. I don't think he would have expected that. That's right, Nick. I've slammed you down. Come on my podcast, yeah? Come here as a thank you for coming, by the way, because we really needed you. But when you say something, I'm going to... Guess what? You talk on here, and I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. Go on, Seb.
I bail you out of a huge hole, and this is the thanks I get. Disagreeing with a point where I have slightly misinterpreted a football game. Unbelievable. Sorry, Seb.
I was going to say, I that high line felt to me like an act of self-preservation. Like it was preemptive in a way that we know what City will want to do. We know where they want to exert the pressure in that opening half an hour. Let's take that option away from them. It's like, you can beat us, but you're not going to beat us with that kind of bewitching network of passes, that like sort of that interchange around the edge of our box with a Sterling or a Mahrez or a Jesus slipping into space and scoring from 8 yards. You're not going to score that goal. And that's a kind of, okay, we're a big outsider in this game. We've kind of got nothing to lose. The title's gone. So why don't we at least inject some uncertainty and take away the familiarity? It was interesting.
And the way they played as well,
bold.
like they never passed it backwards. Like this is the other thing. You have Harry Maguire with his back, his face towards his own goalkeeper, and he fucking turns you. Like that's not something he does in other games very often. I appreciate he tries to carry beyond the first line in many games, but cutting it around players on the sidelines, not something that we've seen Man United defenders do. I think this was a specific game plan. And it worked. It was funny. It almost befuddled City. City, I don't think they knew what to do with it, despite the fact that they have Mahrez and Sterling, two exceptionally fast players who, if they'd worked out sooner, or if they'd had the flexibility to work out that they could just run in behind, because certainly Mahrez is probably faster than Luke Shaw, right? Harry Maguire isn't the fastest player. Lindelof is played because he can pass the ball instead of Eric Bailly, who is actually fast. They could have scored, I think, if they played the ball over the top or played it in behind, but they didn't do that. They continued to try and do the same thing that they would have done if Man United had set up with a deeper line. And I just found that to be an odd thing to watch. It's a bit like making a plan that relates to that, seeing that it's different. It's obvious that it's different, but then just not changing anything at all. It's not a smart thing to do. I don't get it. Anyway, I'm shouting now, bringing down a tone. Let's talk about Bruno Fernandes.
You did get a little bit shouty there. That was weird.
It was very exciting. I like it when
it's good enthusiasm.
Humans do a different thing. Humans do things against each other, yeah? I just like it when the big team loses. That's all. And I appreciate that I'm sort of insulting both teams by saying that. But Bruno Fernandes did a fantastic job in his post-match interview of making this seem like an ordinary win. I don't know if either of you watched his post-match interview, but he basically just said, it's just a normal game. We won it. We win other games as well. What's your point? City have, I think, 11 points clear. Have probably won the league, right? But it's just I imagine for supporters, it would be quite nice to see Fernandes talking in that manner because it's something I think United have been a bit devoid of over the last 6-7 years. I remember David Moyes saying, complimenting Man City and saying, we want to play like them, and that feeling like the kind of the significant shift in the perception from outside and inside the camps, right? But the way that Fernandes was talking, he felt like a winner. Do you know what I'm saying, Seb?
Yeah, I do. We didn't have that on German TV, but I'm familiar with the kind of the trope of a player doing that after a big win, trying very, very, very hard not to be excited because it's the kind of thing people jump on and go, oh, he's got that winning mentality. Like that's what we need. We need more of that.
We need more of that.
Kind of, yeah.
What is that?
It's like he's a sort of footballer that Solskjaer has manifested from the midichlorians or something. Not only that he's obviously a brilliant player and he's bailed United out on a number of occasions over the last year or so, but that Solskjaer, I think he's probably stopped doing it. He's stopped doing it quite so much now because maybe someone's sort of tapped him on the shoulder and says, "Ollie, you're sounding slightly ridiculous. You're just repeating the same thing." But doing that kind of, whenever someone asks him a question, he says, this is Manchester United. Like it's
What are you talking about?
or if he's adding a flourish, this is Manchester United Football Club.
Yeah.
That he is, this was a
he's
guy
knitted
who,
entirely from Man United mythology. Like
exactly. It's like we're Manchester United. Of course, we've won this game. What's wrong with you?
It's a bit of Cantona or a bit of Keane.
Bit of Cantona, a bit of Keane, and it's the sort of thing that when people say that broadly meaningless thing, he's a Manchester United player. That's kind of what they would like to think that they mean, that they take. This was beating Manchester City, and they react in the same way to beating Manchester City in 2021 as they did in 1997 or something.
Have you guys noticed? Solskjaer's got a new thing. He's replaced that kind of "we're Manchester United" with a sort of a pale impression of Ferguson's anger. So whenever something comes up in the game, like an interviewer asks him a question he doesn't like after the game, or asks him a question which he thinks, if he were Alex Ferguson, he shouldn't like, he kind of does this sort of "oh, fuck off" kind of routine, like, because he's such a nice man though, isn't he? He comes across as such a nice guy, such a gentle, mild-mannered person, and then it's like he's been badly cast for a role where he feels like he has to like slag off Des Kelly, or have a pop at the Chelsea website writer, or it works because people swallow it, they go for it and they write articles about it, and good for him. But it does very much feel like
the other day when he said, "No, you said, I didn't say that. You said it." But I mean, yeah, it's true.
it is. It's kind of it's like watching somebody learn a new personality trait. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. Speaking of personality traits, that's a bad segue. I don't know how I'm going to work with that one. Henderson, he's got a personality, but so does De Gea, and one has to make a choice because you can only have one goalkeeper on the pitch at a time. At the moment, did people are saying, "Oh, aren't United kind? They've let De Gea go on paternity leave." And I thought, well, he should just be allowed anyway. But maybe it's
some paternity leaves are easier than others. I mean,
I'm thinking maybe it's kind of helping them a little bit here, because Henderson has been making it obvious, apparently, over the last couple of months, that he feels that he's ready to start. He wants to play more. There's a potential, I suppose, that he would leave in the summer if he isn't sort of given the opportunity at that number one spot. Maybe it's just helping that ease that situation a little bit. And it's a tricky situation. So Nick, I'm going to come to you now to say, Henderson is clearly ready to start somewhere, right? And could leave in the summer. But I think I was reading Danny Taylor after the game, and Danny Taylor was saying, can you really make De Gea a £375,000 per week substitute? Also, who would buy him on those wages, even if you did choose Henderson to start? It's a tricky situation to manage. You're Solskjaer. Go.
Wow. Well, this is Manchester United. This is Manchester United football. Oh no, sorry, that's. Sorry, I need to update it slightly. It's a kind of it's an odd one, which is it's one of the very, very many reasons that I wouldn't want to be manager of a big football club. Not that necessarily this is that I would agonise over who is the better goalkeeper between De Gea and Henderson. I think it's probably still De Gea, but I don't think there's a huge amount in it. And if I had decided, well, okay, I think Henderson's the better goalkeeper, there would always be that thing in sort of nagging me at the back of my mind. Well, I look ridiculous if I am putting a guy who's paid this much money on the bench. When really, if you are a strong, confident manager of a massive football club, that sort of thing shouldn't come into your thinking at all. And it's kind of no one. I don't think anyone particularly. People wouldn't react so much if you had a striker who was paid a monstrous amount of money on the bench, or a midfielder or something like that. There would be the kind of odd. This is a bit weird. This very expensive player's on the bench. Why aren't you playing him? But it's magnified so much when it's a goalkeeper. I also, having said all that and used kind of very saying that logic should be the only reason that you pick a goalkeeper, I would be slightly hesitant about giving Henderson too much time, because to me he has extremely strong Joe Hart vibes in right. As much as he's kind of good. He's obviously a very good goalkeeper, but he's got that sort of Joe Hart attitude where he, extremely confident, and then when he makes a mistake, he looks like a kind of he will look like a sort of lost boy in a supermarket who can't find his
Pride
mum.
comes, yeah.
Yeah, I was at that game, the Liverpool Sheffield United game last season. You can remember when he it was one of quite a number of games where Liverpool were played basically like they have been doing this season. But then Wijnaldum hit a kind of fairly weak shot and it just kind of squirted through Henderson's hands and went in, and he had that sort of crestfallen look on his face, but also with the "I'm going to front up and be a man about this" face immediately.
The shaking adrenaline man.
Yeah, exactly. yeah, exactly.
You said you used the example of a child being lost in a supermarket there. That was one of the most frightening things that could happen to you, as it really was as a child, wasn't it? I remember it happening to me, and I'll say now, on the rare occasion that if I go shopping alone, I'm fine. If I go shopping with my partner and I lose sight of her, I'll still have a little pang. Really? And then I have to remind myself, like, you're an adult man. Everything's fine. You've got money. You know where you live. You live over the road, by the way. You've got keys to your house. She'll be fine. Nothing to worry about. You're not lost. But I still get that tiny little pang because, fuck me, that was frightening, wasn't it?
You've also probably both got mobile phones, so if you do, lose track of each other, you can just say, "Oh, I'm by the oranges."
Now, no reception in the co-op, by the way, so that is
fair enough. Yeah, that's a good
it's
point.
a bit of a problem.
I used to
they can sort that out.
When I was little, I used to. This was more kind of Marks and Spencer's thing rather than supermarket.
Of course, it was.
Those like clothes rails where there were like 4 rails coming out and a sort of void in the centre. When I was sort of 5 or 6, I would do that thing where I would go into the middle of that and sort of hide in the void. But I think I would prick around for a few minutes and then come out, and my mum would be just stand there patiently waiting for me. Sure. In reality, she was just, she was going up and doing her shopping. So
she was overwhelmed by the quality of the clothes being sold.
Exactly.
In
Yeah.
1990s Marks and Spencers.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. We're all lost in some ways, aren't we? And 2 other teams that are lost, West Brom and Newcastle. So we will come back after this short break and talk about them. Oh-ho! It's West Brom 0 Newcastle. I watched this as one of the 3 weekend games for myself. The other was also a 0-0, Wolves Aston Villa. By the way, we were going to talk about Wolves Aston Villa, and then it got cut from the plan for reasons of boringness. Which is a shame because I did a whole poll on Twitter and everything. But we will come back with Tim Spears towards the end of the season to talk about Wolves more in depth, and we'll talk about Villa probably later in this week because they're looking a little bit ropey without Grealish. But anyway, back to West Brom Newcastle. Let's kick things off with Nick's special stat.
Well, I'm coming at you with sort of half a stat here because this game was obviously 0-0. Apparently, it was the first game in 3 years to have no goals and no bookings in it either. It's only half a stat because I don't know what the last one of those was.
Right.
But it just kind of I just thought it was nice.
No one does. That's the thing about that kind of stat. Those games,
yeah.
They're supposed to fade away. You're not supposed to remember them. Opta deliberately don't collect that kind of information. They just collect the date.
It was just I just thought it was nice it spoke to the sort of unique uneventfulness of this game, which was things happened, but none of the fun things happened.
You're absolutely right. Things happen, and do you know what? An uneventful game for such a big event as well, because this really was important. It wasn't like it wasn't important. It really was. West Brom, 8 points short of Brighton, who have a game in hand. It felt like this was their last opportunity to escape. I don't know, 10 games left, maybe not, but it certainly had that feeling to it. It's clear that Allardyce has had some impact, but that just isn't. We're just not seeing it in the results, and maybe there's not been enough time. Seb, was it too little, too late, or is it just a case of the team's just not good enough?
Well, having spent all of this game gardening with my father-in-law, outside.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
I felt like I made that quite clear on the WhatsApp chat.
Sorry, Nick.
Your
did you watch
silent
this game?
disapproval. No, that's.
I did. Yes, I did watch the game.
Sorry, I should have directed that at Nick. Go on, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, this is a full disclosure podcast. We tell you, we don't try and bluff it. We tell you the games we haven't watched.
Can't be bothered to lie. Can't be bothered.
It's okay because most of the players were also gardening at the time, so it's not. It's fine.
Seb, you'd also be lying to your father-in-law by kind of suggesting that you had been paying attention to this game. So I think
Exactly that.
For the best for everyone. Yeah,
I've chosen the easier path.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that they that's kind of that noise. I think is how.
Let me give you this instead. Here's another, because you're absolutely right. That is the only response. Let me ask you specifically about Ainsley Maitland-Niles, because he has been a good addition to the team, right? And against Newcastle, he looked like the most likely player to create that moment of quality that was necessary. What do you think his future looks like? Is he just on loan, presumably?
Yeah, on loan until end of the season.
So what do you think of his future? Because he looks like a tidy player. That's something people say, isn't it?
Yeah, he does, and you kind of fear that he's going to be one of those players who will never quite know where the best way to use him, because I think he started. I remember actually watching him when he was on loan at Ipswich, I think he was playing as a right winger at that point, and he didn't look particularly special at that stage. But he's played at right back for Arsenal. I think he sees himself as more of a kind of centre midfielder. And this is obviously where he's been playing for West Brom broadly in a kind of midfield three, and he's obviously got a lot of the sort of qualities that would mark him out as a very very at the very least kind of adequate Premier League player. But he also has the kind of vibe of one of those players who is at a big club but will be bought by Southampton for £12 million in the summer or something like that.
Tom Cleverley.
Yeah, well, harsh. Cleverley always had that kind of thing where you weren't quite sure what he was for. He was just sort of he would pass it around slightly neatly, but he wouldn't really do much. He wasn't particularly dynamic. He was just kind of there, and I think he's kind of settled quite nicely into that groove at Watford. But Maitland-Niles has a little more about him, I think, than Cleverley. He has a little bit more dynamism and pace, and I don't know. He seems more of a kind of purposeful player than Cleverley, but also
he's better than Cleverley. Who's he worse than? Let's play that game.
Who's he worse than? Well, most of the Arsenal team. That helps.
The Price is Right. Okay. Yeah.
It also there was also that talk of, was it last summer, where he seemed to be on the verge of going to Wolves, which seemed like a quite a good. If Wolves had kind of got rid of Matt Doherty and brought in Ainsley Maitland-Niles to play there, then that felt like it would be more of a kind of a good fit and more of a decent career move for him. So yeah, I don't know.
I feel like I understand that thing though, because you look at David Alaba at the moment, who apparently one of the things he wants in any club that he joins is to play in central midfield, and I imagine that as a talented player such as he is, he probably was playing in central midfield, or at least was one of these kind of adaptable type players when he was younger. He's just so good that he would be good wherever you play him. And then you get stuck, don't you? You get stuck in defence. You get stuck at fullback, or in his case, you move to centre back at some point. Maybe the young players, they're looking up to people like David Alaba, and they're saying, no, make a stand early, don't accept it. Because like the idea that the players who could play at fullback should also have a crossover of qualities with those who can play in central midfield. This is going to happen more and more often, isn't it? And maybe the advice is tell them to fuck themselves.
Yeah, I'm also sort of fascinated by the psychology of players like that, like Matty Cash, for example, who moved as one of the best right backs in the Championship last season. He was never a right back until the start of last season at Forest, when he filled in because all of the other right backs fell over, and one of the alternatives was Carl Jenkinson. So there was literally no other option. So, but he's now kind of stuck there. He's now a right back. He's moved to Aston Villa as a right back. He wears number 2. He's definitely a right back. The other thing, I've just written a piece about Omar Richards, who is the Reading left back who is moving to slightly implausibly moving to Bayern Munich in the summer.
Oh.
When he arrived at Reading, he was a sort of winger / number 10. Apparently, kind of modelled his game on David Silva, and in training they would do this thing where they would purposefully put players in the wrong position so they can just gain a bit more of an appreciation of different positions around the pitch, look at the game a slightly different way, put them there for 3 or 4 practice games, and then when they've learned a bit of a lesson, they stick them back in their original position. But Richards was so good as a left back that the coach had just said, "Oh, we'll keep him at left back. You're a left back now. This is where you're playing." And it doesn't really seem like he had much say in all this. He just had the misfortune of being really good in a position that he probably didn't want to play, or initially didn't want to play in anyway. This is quite a tangent from Ainsley Maitland-Niles, but
no. Yes. Let's bring it back to him and say, "Hey, Ainsley Maitland-Niles, you fucking do it, man. You do what you want. Don't let those people tell you to play in a different position. If you want to play in the central of the field, that's where you play. Yeah, empowered." Anyway, I've got a take on West Brom. Are you ready for this, Seb? You'll be interested to hear this because it's not often that I've got a take. But here's one now. And this is with particular reference to Allardyce being the manager, and Allardyce being the kind of manager who tries to make things good. Yeah, particular things. I mean, every manager tries to make things good. Here's a problem for West Bromwich Albion. It's not passing or even identifying opportunities, because they weren't bad at doing that against Newcastle, albeit it's Newcastle. It's the second and third runners that weren't ever there on time. And it was really noticeable in this game that a decent pass would be played up top, and Diagne often would be able to bring it down and play it off, or maybe it'd be Maitland-Niles or Phillips or whoever was up there in the area, and they'd knock down or they'd be passed into a little bit of space, and you think, if Gallagher or Pereira or Maitland-Niles or Phillips or whoever is 2 seconds quicker than they clearly are all game, they have a shot. Because the ball's being knocked into space. And that is something that Allardyce is supposed to emphatically drum into players. And you could just see that they were always just a tiny, tiny bit behind this happening. This is why I asked at the beginning. I know you didn't watch this specific game, but perhaps we can rephrase the question to be slightly broader and for you to answer it very briefly, because we've spent a lot of time on West Brom. But it's just not working, is it?
This is always the kind of problem with Allardyce coming in. Not only coming into a team where the quality of players was sort of very obviously lower than the previous salvage jobs he'd done, but that he had less time for kind of assorted reasons than he has in other jobs. He came in later than he did at Crystal Palace or Sunderland. There was obviously the compressed chaotic schedule that he'll have to deal with, and there was always I don't necessarily want to kind of make excuses for him, but just to say, well, the only reason he hasn't saved them is because he hasn't had as much time as he wanted. But that's kind of obviously a factor, and you suspect that if there were he did have a little bit more time to work with players on the training pitch, maybe, then he might have improved that. He might have improved players like Maitland-Niles and Gallagher from getting onto those second and third balls. But he just he hasn't been able to. He took this job on too late, and they sort of seemed too far gone for him to make a significant impact.
Yeah, okay. Pronounced dead at the scene. Newcastle. I feel like that's the sort of thing they'd say on the Guardian Weekly, isn't it? That sort of thing. Yeah, sorry. I'll go back to what I normally do. Quick thing on Newcastle. I wanted them to lose, not before the game, but only during the game, because if only to punish them for treating this as a game that was okay to draw, because that's what they did, and it wasn't okay to do that, even though it probably was, because they did draw, and it probably is okay. Also, I feel bad for them because they're missing Almiron, Saint-Maximin, and Wilson. But the more interesting thing about Newcastle this week, and I'm sure this has been covered on other podcasts too, is the mole. Have we all heard about the mole? Because Steve Bruce confirmed last week that he was starting an investigation into the mole. Someone leaked a row Bruce had with Matt Ritchie at training, which Bruce confirmed was true. But according to the Mail, he called it treason. And I just was wondering if anybody wondered how they were going to try and find the mole.
I'm picturing very much a kind of Gareth Keane investigate situation within the Newcastle training base. Did you not find yourself wanting Matt Ritchie to score so that you could see, like, if he scored a goal under those circumstances in the 90s, there would have been a choreographed celebration with Steve Bruce, which kind of made gentle fun of their situation,
Sure.
And then got repeated on Premier League years forever.
And Steve really would have thrown his all into that as well, wouldn't he? You know he would have done.
Yeah. He'd really committed to it. Yeah.
I'd like to think that if Ritchie had scored, he would have done a sort of very over the top, sarcastic. You know how at Euro 2016, whenever Wales players scored, they all ran over to the bench, and it was this kind of great symbol of unity and something like that. I like to think that Matt Ritchie would do a sort of sarcastic version of that. He'd run over. He wouldn't have lined this up with Bruce before the game, but he'd dash over to the bench and jump into Steve Bruce's jump into Steve Bruce's grateful arms, and he would kind of play along with it a little bit, but at the same time knowing, actually, no, he's taking the piss here.
Well, he's going to, anyway, if he finds the mole, he's going to crush it, I reckon, old Steve. But I was thinking, something along the lines of that bit in The Departed when they try to flush it out by calling them all in separately and telling them different things that they could leak to see if it gets leaked to the press. Like what Steve's having for dinner, or he's going to write his fourth book, or, just to see which one gets back to the Mirror or wherever it was. I don't know.
It'll end up being like Lee Charnley, but by complete accident. It will be some kind of haphazard tale of disinformation where he was talking to one person, but actually in the earshot of somebody else. It's that kind of thing.
Or one of those classic things where you occasionally hear about government ministers leaving papers on a train or something like that. Sort of,
but Lee Charnley talking about it really loudly on the phone on the train and not understanding how
accidentally left it on a park bench during his kind of 1 hour government mandated walk or something. I don't know.
Wearing a trench coat. Anyway, we've lingered too long on such a game of such. Anyway, we'll be back after this to hear Seb talking about German football. Hello? Yeah, it's German football time with Seb. And Seb, you've written a lot of notes here, which I can't read and convert into questions in my mind. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you the floor. And I think Nick watched this game too. Did you, Nick? Or did you actually, this was the same time as West Brom Newcastle, wasn't it?
Yeah, I kind of there was an element of double screening, so
fine.
I watched. I paid half attention to it.
Do you know what I'm going to do, Seb? I'm actually going to go and smoke a cigarette, and I'm going to leave you to talk about this game with Nick for 4 minutes until I come back, okay?
Okay, I shall take it from now.
Yeah.
I feel like, maybe the amount of notes is kind of an overcompensation as I stress my own life circumstances, my relocation. I am cool and European now, and I want everybody to know it. But
Seb only likes German things now.
I do. I'm overcompensating. But this was interesting, and although obviously in an entirely predictable sort of soul-crushing way. But what I was going to ask you is, I found myself kind of behind Dortmund because, one of the things that they tell you when you come through the customs gate at Germany is that you kind of have to hate Bayern Munich. So I kind of got on board that train. Like, where are your loyalties here?
Well, yeah, instinctively you would kind of go against Bayern Munich, just because of the sort of merciless success for since the late 60s or something like that, and you rail against that. I almost dislike Dortmund more than Bayern because they've just let me down so often, and this was a sort of this game was sort of encapsulation of that, where they would, and it seems to happen every time these two play each other, that Dortmund start well and go 2-0 up, and then you think, well, no, all right, well, this is all very well and good, but Lewandowski's going to start running in a minute, and he will inevitably score the goals that will, it was like it's a bit like if you sort of you have someone on a kind of those like long sort of bendy. They look like skipping ropes, but they use them for like resistance training. If you,
Oh yeah. I know what you mean.
yeah, it's almost like Bayern have got Dortmund on the end of one of those, and they said, "Go on, Dortmund, run ahead," and Dortmund run ahead, and they get to the end of this thing, and then they're yanked back mercilessly. And it just seems to, it happens every time, and it is a kind of very emotionally, or emotionally difficult to trust Dortmund after all this time. So for that reason, I've I've almost given up dealing with them. And the Leipzig thing is I don't know.
It's tricky. It's really tricky.
It is tricky. The obvious. I mean, it feels like an obvious points to make that they are the concept of them is pretty unpalatable, but they do have this kind of very exciting, dynamic team with a very exciting, dynamic, and poorly dressed manager. I don't know. Have you? I know they're obviously sort of treated with much more suspicion in Germany, but have you kind of? Is that just an against modern football thing that is a view that is held by a relatively small traditional minority, or now that you're a German expert, okay, what is it a generally held view that they are sort of seen as suspicious and not to be trusted?
Well, I've been in Germany for 15 days, and 14 and a half of those have been spent in quarantine. But during that 12 hours...
You're telling me you haven't taken the pulse of the nation?
I feel like, like if there is a straw poll to take, it'll probably happen in the next few days.
What does your father-in-law think?
No, he's firmly behind Leipzig. We were actually watching their game against Gladbach last weekend, and he was very excited by Leipzig's very late Alexander Sorloth winner. But it's interesting because I compare it actually to the situation in British football, because I was born in 1984 and I grew up in an era of Manchester United dominance. So my default setting is to dislike Manchester United and to enjoy their disappointments and their defeats, and to see anything other than a Man United win in the Premier League each season as a kind of a positive, as something refreshing. But then within that can kind of leave you blind to, newer, potentially more malignant phenomena in football, things which are less desirable. So you have to put that tribalism aside and those kind of habits of a lifetime to one side. So it's conflicting. What I would say about this game, though, is there was one moment which really summed it up, when Erling Haaland had come off with what looked like a badly bruised ankle, and he was sat on the substitutes bench with ice strapped to him. Marco Reus was withdrawn too. He just looked absolutely spent. And he came down, sat on the substitutes bench next to Haaland, and my German isn't quite up to lip reading yet, but seemed to say something along the lines of, "Oh, for fuck's sake." And it was that game, because there was never a point, even at 2-0, where you ever felt comfortable with Dortmund in the lead, or ever had any confidence in them sort of holding out. And as the game wore on, Goretzka and Kimmich just destroyed everything in front of them. They just controlled the game so totally that you had 9 Dortmund outfield players and a single centre forward. After Haaland went off, it was Marco Reus. And it was hopeless. It was like waiting for the tide to come in. It almost felt self-perpetuating, because it feels like, okay, Dortmund were short of a few players at the Allianz Arena. They're short of Jadon Sancho, of course. and their defense needs a little bit of work. But it feels almost like they're battling an inferiority complex and just a fear of what's happened so many times before. It's like Nick's a baseball fan. It's like watching the Boston Red Sox against the New York Yankees pre 2004, is it, when they first won the first World Series?
Yeah, 2004.
Yeah, it's like that. So over time, more and more stupid stuff happens, and there's more and more self-defeat, and there's more and more acts of self-sabotage, and that becomes the problem even more so than the team you're facing. And it just looked like that. They just looked so helpless. It was it was sad, sad to watch.
I can relate. Anyway, let's more and more self-sabotage. Very briefly, Seb, tell me about Harry Kane's goal for Tottenham, and then we're gonna do quotes and facts, and then we're gonna finish. We were going to talk about Barca's elections, but let's do that in the midweek episode because I think we've run out of time.
I was just going to say about that Harry Kane goal, the first one he scored on Sunday against Palace. That's such a difficult technique. If you were to take me down to the park now and fire a ball into my feet, and I was to try and do that, that's the technique which would most likely lead to me making a fool of myself, or the biggest fool of myself. Because that's the one where you swing at it.
I feel like, see, what you did there is you set up a great analogy and then you brought it down, crumbling down with a very standard answer. Because the reality is, put you in any situation and you'd make a fool out of yourself. What I think what you mean to say
but they're different
is
grades
that if you tried it 1,000 times, you wouldn't do it once, you know? Is that what you mean?
No, because
I was. You gave us all these stakes in your thing, and then there was no payoff. And you know they call that a box office loser. That's what they say. You're not. No,
wow.
Hello.
Okay.
No. You see, the thing is you've completely misread
Give me the payoff.
How self-deprecating I'm willing to be. Because if you say 1,000 times, then you're kind of saying, well, I could strike.
No, I'm saying you wouldn't do it in 1,000 times.
No, I might do. I was a decent footballer.
Are you?
I would swing, miss, and it would hit my standing foot, and I'd probably fall over. Maybe my shorts would fall down too. But my point being, well done, Harry Kane. Nice technique.
It's a sort of goal that I think would be. It's the sort of technique that I would definitely not be able to pull off, but also the sort of technique where I would consider it. Let's consider it most likely that I would pop my hip out while trying it.
See, there we go. That's the payoff, Seb. That's what you were looking for. Is what Nick's done there is he's taken your stakes that you built, and they were good stakes. Don't get me wrong; it was a nice setup. And what Nick's done is he's shown you how to finish. Okay, because that's how you do it. You pop the hip. Yeah, that's a real problem. You got to go to the hospital if you pop your hip out. That's a real you potentially life lasting consequences to a hip popping. You make a fool of yourself every day. That's what I'm saying. You have to balance the payoff to the stakes that you set. You fail to do so, and if you don't try harder, I think next week you'll find it's Alex, Nick, and I on the Tifo podcast. Yeah.
This is now less about the analogy and more about your day-to-day attempts to grind my pride away.
It is. Is it working?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah,
good.
The
we
other
can
thing
move on then.
The other thing I liked is that Kane's first goal was the sort of technique that I would never be able to pull off. The second goal, it was almost exactly the sort of thing I would do if I was presented with a header in a football game, because he sort of misheaded.
So deliberate. Yeah.
Well, yeah. With Kane, you think, well, that is the kind of it is deliberate, or if it wasn't deliberate, it was because he sort of misheaded it down because I don't know, the ball dipped in mid-flight or something like that. But if it was me, I would have done exactly the same thing because I would have had my eyes closed, or I'd been scared of the football coming up my face. And so, but it was a sort of thing that just for a minute you could feel you could relate to, one of the best footballers in the world, this kind of elite athlete who can do things you could never even dream of. But just for that one moment, you think, no, that's probably exactly what would happen if I was in that situation too. It's just that he is probably doing it for slightly different reasons other than lack of talent and pure incompetence.
Indeed.
When you used to head the ball, did you? I never learned not to do this, but instead of actually using your neck to head the ball, you kind of just push your face in the vague direction of it and hope it hits you in the right part of the head. Yeah, that was my heading technique for about 10 years.
Absolutely, yeah.
quite a decent footballer. Anyway, we'll be back after this to talk about, to do Joe's player quotes and facts database. It's Joe's Quotes and Facts database. Yes, that's right. Welcome back to the database. And today, because we didn't get a chance to talk about how Fulham beat Liverpool, I've chosen a few Fulham players to do for the database. The first. Now, listen, Nick, just to inform you, I know you haven't been on this podcast before. Whilst we've done the database, let me just tell you about it. It's a great idea. Yeah, it's an idea pretty sure no one else has ever had, and that idea is just to pick every player over the period of a season and give a fact about them and something they said. Yeah, it's really smart. No one's ever done it before, and so here we go. The first player is Kenny Tete. Kenny Tete. No, by the way, none of these are that funny. Kenny Tete, a fact about him is his father, Miguel Tete, had relocated to the Netherlands he was a former European heavyweight kickboxing champion who currently works at the Bulldog coffee shop on the Leidersplein in downtown Amsterdam. There we go. Former European heavyweight kickboxing champion, Miguel Tete. And Kenny Tete's quote was when he was asked in his first interview after joining Fulham, how did he hear about their interest and when did he hear about it? He said, "I heard 2 weeks ago. I heard Fulham, Premier League, and I was bowled over." So there you go. I'm not sure if he was bowled over at the fact that Fulham were in the Premier League or if he was just very excited to be joining. Can't tell. Michael Hector. Michael Hector is the son. There's a lot of famous fathers in this section. Michael Hector is the son of former Essex cricketer Pat Hector. And I like that because I think Pat Hector is one of the best names I've ever heard.
Pat Hector. That's not the name. That's not the name of an athlete, is it? Pat Hector. That's
really not.
Yeah. That's kind of it's your dad's mate who works in insurance or something like that.
Yeah,
solid.
It's a kind of like a farmer with a bad attitude. He's
You're right.
Sort of ground down by life.
Pat
and
Hector.
It's just really
Anyway,
yeah.
he was Essex cricketer Pat Hector. So well done to Pat. Here's again not hugely funny, but Michael quote tweeted a video of Matt Hancock being asked why he didn't back free school meals during the holidays before Rashford intervened, and he said, whilst quote tweeting it, he said, "This sums up the government. This muppet was quick to point the finger, but never take responsibility for his actions. Clown face." And it's not that funny, but also, fuck Matt Hancock. Anyway, that's the end of Joe's Facts and Quotes database, and that's also the end of the podcast. So I would say to Nick Miller, the Miller Man, the Millman, the Dr. Miller the Killer, thanks so much for coming. It's been a pleasure to have you here, and you were a very adequate replacement for Alex today.
That's all I could possibly hope for. To be called adequate by Joe Devine.
When you set your sights low, you often meet them. And that's what my mother told me. And Seb, thanks so much to you, as usual, for really being a great sport. Yeah? Just doing your best.
Thank you, Joe.
Because if there's something I admire in people, it's just that they keep trying, even if they're not that good.
Just refuse to accept failure. Just carry on.
Wow.
Never let your spirits drop. Just get on with it.
Okay. Thanks to producer Adonis for all his production support. And we'll be back on Friday with another game-relevant podcast. But for now, au revoir, Tipos.
The Athletic.